You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Tuesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team just about every day. Still I'm going through some of the mental stuff, folks, but we are doing our best to get you what we can when we can. But we are going to talk about a couple different things today, Tuesday. Kind of recap a little bit. I really like some of the things that Mike Elston said. We met with Mike Elston. We didn't really talk that much about Jesse Minter as well. But we're going to get in. I think we did a little bit, but we're going to get into a little bit of what the coaches have said, that type of stuff. Pushing what was supposed to be last week's mailbag to, you're going to try to double up and we're not going to have a mailbag this week, especially because we're going to call for questions early next week. Since I'm going to potentially be out of town. But nonetheless, we are going to talk about that. We'll talk about just a little bit about hockey and women's basketball. Women's basketball is obviously over for the year. Hockey is continuing on. And from there, I have some thoughts on just kind of the state, the difference between the state of Michigan athletics and what to me is a perceived lack of excitement overall. So we're going to get to all of that. So first and foremost, we talked to Mike Elston for the first time today on Tuesday afternoon, meeting with him as he discussed the defensive line. I continue to feel like they seem really excited about what they have. We've heard them say things about the front seven. Jesse Minter talked about, the front seven, really a strength. But we haven't talked about the linebackers because I haven't really heard anything. We haven't met from George Hilo yet this spring. So that's still kind of up in the air. But we finally met with Mike Elston, and he had a lot of really good things to say about the state of the defensive line. Really, obviously, Mazi Smith is the guy that they're talking about as being a game breaker. And Mike Elston, I thought one of the interesting things that he had to say was that we are going to have to develop an interior pass rush, because the thing about it is that we have we don't have Aiden, we don't have David Ajabo, so it's that much more imperative to get production from all over the place. Not only get production from Taylor Upshaw, Mike Morris, but to get Mazi going. They seem to really like Chris Jenkins a lot. And then two names he mentioned, neither were Rashawn Benny, and these were unprompted names. He mentioned George Rooks and Dominic Giudice. So that could be really interesting if those are the guys that are coming on, if those are the guys that are going to be doing some things rotationally. So yeah, he says obviously we want to have a rotation, but that's all kind of up to the head guy, to Jim Harbaugh. Kind of evaded it to some degree, but certainly it feels like there's a lot to like about what he's got on the defensive line. And obviously there's, we talk about Mike Morris and Taylor Upshaw, and he didn't mention a lot of the other guys, but we've heard throughout spring, TJ Guy, we've heard his name mentioned. We've heard Braden McGregor mentioned. He got mentioned today. Obviously, he's a guy that you really hope can come on. I mean, it makes sense that he didn't really play much last year, considering he was coming off an ACL injury, still really kind of getting acclimated. You can think of him as a sophomore in a sense, even though he's been around. And then, we'll see how some other guys like Keyshawn Bennett do this next year, or just in the spring game. So lots of really good stuff there. I want to reiterate how encouraged I was by Jesse Minter, meeting with him, talking about how this is year 2. They're not going into this with the idea of like, all right, new defensive coordinator, third in as many years, it's time to start over. No, he's picking right up where Mike Macdonald left off. Doesn't matter the fact that he got his start, defensive coordinator before he went to the Baltimore Ravens. He was at this defensive coordinator at Indiana State and Georgia State, then was with the Baltimore Ravens, then went to as a defensive backs coach before becoming Vanderbilt's defensive coordinator. But he knows exactly the system Mike Macdonald was running and why. Obviously, it was not a carbon copy of what was happening in Baltimore, but it had a lot of similarities, and he knows how to come in and run it. I was very, very encouraged after we spoke to him. Like, I feel like there's just a lot to really, really like about the state of the Michigan defense. The big question I still have is linebackers, just because there aren't a lot of them. But I like the four that you think of: Junior Colson, Mike Barrett, Nakai Hill-Green, and Kalel Mullings. And I feel like I always forget Kalel Mullings for some reason. But, I mean, he's a guy that we got to see quite a bit last year. So then we just got to see if some of these other guys, Jaden Hood and Tyler McLaurin, are these guys that take that next step up. So it'll be interesting, the state of this defense. But I really like that. We talked to Grant Newsome as well today, but a lot of what we spoke to him about was his transition. I mean, keeping in mind, it was like, I remember interviewing him as a player while he was in a battle for left tackle going into 2016 with Ben Bredesen, and now he's coaching Ben Bredesen's little brother, Max Bredesen, at tight end. It's wild type of deal, but he's really, really big on Eric All and Luke Schoonmaker, as you can imagine, and it's one of those things where it feels like they feel like, hey, we have an opportunity to have maybe the best tight end group. Like, and I think that's somewhat unheralded, right? In the sense that, we're not necessarily talking about these guys, but I mean, that offense is just, it's has the potential to just be ridiculous, because you look up and down. It's just everywhere. You feel like it's loaded, even with guys that like Luke Schoonmaker was a 3-star, but like, is he playing like a 3-star? No, he's playing like a high 4-star, And you've got that all across the board. You've got that on offensive line. You've got that at wideout. You've got that, if Michigan can open things up in the passing game and the running game stays relatively consistent to what it was last year, say it takes a step back, just a slight one, which isn't a prediction I'm making, because I think that Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards certainly has the capability of being as good, if not better, than Hassan Haskins and Donovan Edwards, and Blake Corum, rather. It has the potential of being really, really good. If the defense comes in and matches somehow like it did last year, I don't think it's going to match the production, but at the same time, Minter says we have the opportunity to build on. Like, yeah, we lose talent. We lose a lot of talent. But these guys were here last year. Now we can put in more stuff. It's taking what was already there and building on it. We were only just scratching the surface, the tip of the iceberg. Opportunity to get even more things going. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. All right, let's talk a little bit about the achievements that are happening in some of the other sports. I think that is important. You all said that you wanted to hear me talk about it. I don't know that I'm going to be able to talk about it terribly coherently, but we're going to try. But before we do, man, I love March Madness. I love those brackets, but I can't remember the last time I went deep or even won any money. I didn't win my own money probably, and the one bracket sounds like Trent Knoop, at least he tells me, is going to win. SOB. Kidding. I'm kidding. Anyway, I'm hedging my bets this year with Stat Hero's NCAA Pick'em contests. Stat Hero's NCAA single game Pick'em pits the star players against each other, an amazing hybrid between fantasy and sports gambling. Take back control from those handicappers that always seem to have the advantage. Start focusing on the players you know best with a gameplay that doesn't rely on big spreads, long odds, or funky props. Stat Hero gives you the advantage, resulting in their gamers winning 4 times more often. Why? Because Stat Hero eliminates the mystery about who or what you are going up against. In addition to their Pick'em games, they also have dozens of lineups you can comb through to take on head-to-head. They simply post sets of players for you to take on with set of players for you to choose. Stat Hero is the easiest and fastest way to get your sports action fix. The simple, sleek gameplay will have you playing in minutes. This is what daily fantasy was meant to be. Sign up for free right now at stathero.com/lockedon. Use the promo code LOCKEDON for a 100% deposit match. That's stathero.com/lockedon. Use the promo code LOCKEDON for a 100% match. That's stathero.com/lockedon, promo code LOCKEDON. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's talk a little bit about the teams that we don't really talk about that are doing excellent. Obviously, one of them is out now. I can talk a bit about the game from yesterday with women's basketball. Really disappointing loss ended up being a 12-point loss to Louisville, but obviously the game was much closer than that. It was pretty much seemed like it was a 7-point game throughout the entire thing, and every time it was, Michigan would cut it to 2. Turnovers, man. It turned the ball over, 22 times to their 12, 14 or something like that. Defenses really came to play on both sides, but Michigan just really couldn't crack it. And every time that Louisville turned it over, Michigan usually followed up with the next possession by turning the ball right back over. And that happened certainly every time that Michigan was down by 2 with the ball. And so there were opportunities, unfortunately. They just were not able to capitalize. Everything kind of went through Naz Hillman, who didn't have the best day when it came to scoring from the floor, but she certainly got put to the free throw line quite a bit. But I thought that turnovers were the big thing because Louisville, out of that, the fact that they both teams turned the ball over pretty frequently, Louisville had 24 points off of turnovers. Michigan had 2. You're not going to win games that way. Fast break points. Louisville had 12, probably a lot because of the turnovers. Michigan had 2. And that was kind of it. So no one else really stepped up to really make things much better. So disappointing that they did not get there. Seemed like they were on the precipice all game until the waning minutes. But still, it was a program best to get to the Elite Eight, and you can see the road for them to get to the Final Four. I mean, they were right there. So giant shout out to Kim Barnes-Arico for being able to get this team to that point, right? Because these are levels that the program has never reached. And it's incredible that they're able to do so. Now, next year, they're going to have to do it without Naz Hillman, who just declared for the WNBA draft today. So that's going to be even more of a challenge. Just kind of like the issue with the men's team, when the defense clamps down, who's going to be your scorer? Who are you going to go to? Where are you going to find those points? And it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult without the program best ever player in Naz Hillman, leading scorer. But the fact that Michigan's, just like what we saw with John Beilein in his initial run, and I know Michigan basketball, men's basketball had long had, we saw the Fab Five, we saw the national championship a couple of years before that. Obviously, Kazi well before that, success sometimes in the 90s and everything. But it was a good 10-year break from any kind of relevance for the Michigan men's basketball team. John Beilein came into what was a mausoleum. I remember being there at Chrysler for a lot of those games in my senior year, working for Big Ten Network in its first year as a camera assistant. And there were dozens of people there. That was it. But if you build it, they will come. And that's going to be the good news for Kim Barnes-Arico, is you get to the Elite Eight. That makes it so much easier to recruit because you can sit there and say, hey, we just need you to help put us over the top. Like, you saw that we could get here. We can continue to build on this. Now, a team that obviously had high expectations and is meeting them right now is hockey, going to the Frozen Four, which should be celebrated, of course, but it would have been a disappointment in my eyes if this hockey team did not get there. And obviously the regular season, it was kind of a mixed bag. But then Big Ten tournament, so far the NCAA tournament, wins over American and Quinnipiac. And yeah, Quinnipiac had some real boneheaded moves, right? taking the goalie out down 1 score with 4 minutes left, allowing Michigan to score on empty net. And then it was just weird. But hey, you know what? You take it, you move on, and you see what you can do against Denver. But the fact that Michigan athletics is going on this kind of tear is pretty incredible, because you just look at the fact that men's hockey is at least equal right now to football, although you can say it's much harder in football because the pool is much bigger, 130 teams compared to a much smaller field in hockey. But still, Final Fours for football and hockey, Elite Eight for women's basketball, Sweet 16 for men's basketball. Then you've got national champion runner-up wrestling. You've got gymnastics. I mean, it's the fact that Michigan athletics is excelling pretty much everywhere is just absolutely insane. And you hope, and that's just in this academic year, you hope that you can get more. I mean, you still have softball, baseball, those teams are just starting. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. And obviously, football is the thing that people care most about. Doesn't really matter that there's going to be people that push back and say, like, oh, no, listen, I care about. No, it doesn't. You do not. We're a basketball school. No, you are not. Football school. And even then, for some reason, it seems like things are kind of waning as far as interest, which is kind of weird coming off of a college football playoff. Let's discuss the reasons why. But before we do, got to talk about something else. After months of playing, college basketball has determined the top teams for the Final Four and will determine this year's national champion this coming week. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info, from all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so one of the things that I think is really weird is that we're in spring ball, right? And I know I'm not writing 15 articles a day like I used to, but even the ones that I am writing is just it's funny. It just seems like, and this is my own gauge, but I've also asked some colleagues, and they're like, I'm like, do people seem a little disinterested? Now, if you're listening to Locked On Wolverines, watching it on YouTube, chances are you are not disinterested, right? You're like, of course I care. I'm delving in like this, right? I want to know everything that happens with University of Michigan. But for those of you who aren't, it's a little confusing to me because Michigan, I'm not going to say it's football-wise that it's the grandest heights. Obviously, there's national championships, but in the modern era, the college football playoff era, heck, the BCS era, this is the best that Michigan's done outside of 2006. And yet, it feels like the enthusiasm in the spring is pretty far down. Now, we'll get a real good gauge of it on Saturday when I'm at the spring game and see how many people come to the big house. But it's funny. It's 2019. It just felt like there was this fervor. 2020 there wasn't, because obviously there was a pandemic that started. 2021 there wasn't, because there was no certainty that Michigan football was going to happen, and it was coming off of a 2-4 season. But I feel like spring football was bigger even in 2017. Certainly 2018, even though we didn't get to see anything. They didn't have an open spring game. But Shea Patterson was coming to town. And maybe if J.J. McCarthy was playing, then maybe that's it. And because obviously his name generates a lot more excitement than anyone else when it comes to this Michigan team. But I don't get it. Now, a lot will probably say that it's because Harbaugh did his flirtation with the NFL, killed a lot of that momentum. Certainly, it looked like it killed some momentum on the recruiting trail, because you'd think you'd follow up with college football playoff appearance by, suddenly like a wave of commits. That hasn't really happened yet. Michigan's gotten just a handful. One today in a 3-star running back in Benjamin Hall, and Brooks Barr last week, 2 weeks ago, whatever. Like, they haven't really done much on the recruiting trail. Obviously, they've overhauled everything there. Is it because the expectations have changed? Now the expectation is go out there like it, because understand that every year everyone's like, yeah, beat Ohio State. Wasn't feasible. And then finally they do it. So is it now like, and even though Michigan hasn't won a championship, it's kind of, I'm wondering, is it a little bit like with the Detroit Pistons, for instance? After the Pistons won a championship, I mean, even the team seemed disinterested in winning another. But remember, like 2006, 2007, getting the Eastern Conference Finals, and it's just like fans were excited. I mean, they were selling out the Palace every single game, but there was kind of a lackadaisical kind of nature. It's just like, all right, well, win it all. You know, I don't know what it is. Is it because there's so many unknowns, particularly on defense? Obviously, offense seems really exciting. Is it because we haven't seen it? Is it because the coaches left? And then now we have to see what it looks like. Like if we go into the spring game, which obviously it's not going to be completely telling in the sense of this isn't, the ones versus twos and, on both sides of the ball. That would be a little bit not necessarily telling, but you kind of get an idea. But this is a draft situation, maize team versus blue team. It would be interesting to see, how that works out in the sense of like, we're looking at certain players compared to different units. Which, I mean, that was the spring game in 2016 was like that. I remember that was a really fun spring game. That was a night game. Yeah, I just wonder, why is enthusiasm down? Because it seems like it is. Basketball enthusiasm doesn't really get up until, it's up if the team goes on a tear like it did last year throughout the regular season. Then it's up and it stays up. But a year like this year, of course, it's going to be down. Not having a great regular season. Once they get to the tournament, it certainly picks up, and that tracks. I talked to my best friend, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't really pay attention to Michigan basketball until like Big Ten tournament." But football has always long been a year-round thing, and it just seems like there isn't much enthusiasm for what's going on with the team right now in spring ball or the NFL draft. And maybe it's the personalities on the team, because certainly it just kind of seems like they're all just like put our head down, go to work. Less sound bites, less bluster compared to, the Jordan Lewises and Chris Wormleys of the world who had things to say. So I'm curious to see. I'm curious to hear. You have a reason why you think? Hit me up on Twitter. We'll talk about it future episodes. But for today's episode, that's going to do it. So thank you for watching and or listening. We're going to do our best to get in as many shows as we can this week, especially with there being a spring game. Apologies for struggles on my end, but we're working towards it. So anyway, thank you for watching and or listening. We'll talk to you soon.